I think I've found the worst Stellar Blade journalist yet. It's happened again. Another day, another out-of-touch game journalist uses video games as an excuse to attack and shame the very people who play them. Yes, that's right folks, we have even more juicy Stellar Blade nonsense to discuss. If you've been following what's going on online, then you will be aware of the huge backlash IGN France received recently. One of their game journalists made rude and insulting comments directed at Stellar Blade's lead designer, going as far as to insinuate that by designing a character that looked like the main protagonist Eve, they must have never seen a woman. Would hit the fan fast, with fans quickly pointing out that not only was Eve's design based on a real woman, but the designer was also married to a very attractive fellow video game artist too. Things would get even worse after that when it was discovered that the IGN France editor responsible for publishing the article was discovered to have made wild posts directly linking Eve's design with women in real life, unaliving themselves and going off on crazy rants about the patriarchy. Even the American IGN themselves would be forced to make a statement, sort of apologising about this incident, choosing to distance themselves from the outspoken French subsidiary. So, with all this going on and being very well documented, then how come there are still articles going up from game journalists referring to Stellar Blade fans as dweebs and dorks, and going as far as to claim that the people who have a problem with Eve looking traditionally beautiful don't even exist, and it's simply a case of, in their own words, the weirdest people online getting mad about an imaginary opposition. Yep, according to thegamer.com, you're all a bunch of delusional crybabies complaining about nothing. With that said, I am Lady Decade. Hit that subscribe button as we are going to eloquently address the salty statements made in an article that outright calls you stupid, in amongst a bevy of further insults aimed at the gaming audience. So let's dive right in and start with their opening paragraph. In an article titled "The Gaming Culture War Over Hot Characters is Hilariously Stupid," Mike Drucker begins by stating, "Before I get too deep into what's sure to be a banger of a column, let me just say it was actually a little hard to pick which thing about the culture gaming war is the most stupid. It could be the idea that small consulting companies are the people with the real power over video game development. Hell, I'd even be willing to give the prize for stupid to people who seem to believe their console represents a moral battleground. All good options, but there's nothing more hilariously stupid than, and I'm being sincere here, the war over hot characters in video games." Instantly starting on the rudest note possible, this journalist doesn't hold back on letting you know exactly what he thinks of you, which is commendably honest, but when he's throwing childish insults around rather than focusing on making a clear point, it detracts from anything legitimate he might have had to say. Childish mudslinging like this is playground level discourse and damages the integrity of the article and the publication who are willing to showcase this rubbish. So before we go further, who even is Mike Drucker? Well, according to his bio on The Gamer, he is an Emmy-nominated and Writers Guild Award-winning writer and comedian living in New York. He's written for television shows including Late Nights, The Tonight Show and Adam Ruins Everything. He also served as a head writer and executive producer on Full Frontal with Samantha Bee. Outside of television, Mike has written for Nintendo and Sony, working on the English language scripts for games including Kid Icarus Uprising. As you can see from his television background, he appears to have worked for the left wing of Legacy Media exclusively, so it's not that surprising that he would be framing his arguments in such an unbalanced way. For the record, I know that both sides of the political coin, particularly in the United States, are renowned for doing this, including the use of childish name-calling in their dialogue. Sometimes such insults can come across as humorous due to inflection in speech. However, the tone is lost in his writing and it just comes across as adversarial. It feels to me that he's addressing us as though we are the dregs of society who are a bunch of know-nothings, with him writing off any issues we might have as delusions. Moving further into his condescending piece, he adds, If you've been following the trades, you've probably heard about a game called Stellar Blade. It's an action game that isn't out yet, but from the small amounts I've seen, seems pretty decent, kind of a Nia vibe. I don't know if it's a first day purchase, but it feels like something I'll end up buying. Unfortunately, that seems less important to the weirdest people online than the fact that the main character, Eve, is hot. And stick with me, her being hot is proof that video games are back in the hands of the real fans. Now, this is where Drucker has completely and entirely missed the point, as there's so much concrete information out there as to why people were angry in the first place. I'm sorry, but what is weird about feeling perturbed when you read statements put out there by game journalists which are intentionally condescending, insulting, and written purposely to generate rage and divide? That sounds like a perfectly rational human reaction to me. I mean, Mr. Drucker, you have demonstrated this in this very article. You write in a way that comes across as though you look down your nose at a huge portion of gamers writing off their concerns as conspiratorial and accusing hundreds of thousands of people of having a straw man argument, even though all of this Stellar Blade stuff kicked off because a game journalist in a position of responsibility confirmed many gamers' fears about the views of the people who control legacy media. The public's concerns are not irrational. IGN France demonstrated this. People are getting fed up with pompous, lofty and holier-than-thou attitudes to the tastes of the mass market and common gamers. I'll add extra inflection here on the word common. The people who aren't working within the arts and television spheres, the people with normal day jobs who would like their fantasy escapism from their day-to-day drudgery left intact, please. Drucker landed a job as an NBC intern fresh from university, which he declares on his own Twitter, a place where he spotlights past events such as rubbing shoulders with the rich and famous. In fact, a significant part of his online presence seems to be bragging about his connections and who he's worked for. He's worked in the entertainment industry his whole career. He's led a very different life to your average consumer, yet he writes in a style of moral superiority, dismissing people who don't agree with his views as weirdos. By the way, I don't have a problem with all people from legacy media. In fact, I'm friends with some people who work in that field, specifically within the UK. What I will say though is that they are all afraid to voice their thoughts and opinions because of the people who shoot them down and can threaten their jobs, like what you're doing with your article in this instance. Drucker's not threatening jobs with this article, but he's certainly dismissing very genuine concerns as hysterics. Indeed, what a bunch of hysterical gamers we all are. He goes on to say, "The best part, this fight is pretty much one-sided. I did not hear a damn word about Stellar Blade existing until I saw someone post that woke people must be mad at Stellar Blade existing." Stellar journalism there, Drucker. It seems that you couldn't be bothered to actually do any journalism there. Or did you actually do it, but it doesn't fit your curated narrative, so you just chose to act like it didn't even exist? First of all, I'm not going to talk about the IGN controversy again, as I cannot see how anyone who calls themselves a game journalist would even miss that. But to prove once again that there are indeed people out there who are vehemently against Eve's design, here are some curated posts from Reset Era of people who despise Eve's appearance, found on Grum's Twitter page. "I live alone, and I'd still be embarrassed to have this on my TV. That intro sequence is so fucking bad. It's just so many elements of fetishistic infantile nonsense. What the hell with that slow motion? It's sad. I guess that's what we've come down to. There are really talented people working really hard to make a game that glorifies a flagrantly misogynistic depiction of its cast. It's just sad. Haven't been disgusted at a game in a good while. This is bad, especially given the developers themselves and the gender war in South Korea. I tend to be ambivalent with sexualized character designs in games, but everything about Stellar Blade is just beyond embarrassing and gross. Kinda hate how it's Sony funded and published. I feel like it wouldn't be getting anywhere nearly as much media attention as it is if it wasn't." I want to believe that Sony was fulfilling a contract and that they won't work with Shift Up again. After it came out, they were a misogynistic developer who punished women working for them for supporting women's rights. But unfortunately, we know they probably don't give a fuck. This is so much more ridiculous and worse than I even thought this game would go for. As you can see, people like this very much do exist, and one thing I will agree with Drucker on is that they are not the majority. These people are the fringe. They are an extreme minority, and one could say the extreme of the extreme minority. But it's not these views themselves which were overly an issue. It's when we get confirmation that people with these fringe ideologies turn out to be the writers and editors working for massive news outlets like IGN trying to publish propaganda. That's the problem. Contradicting the evidence we've just looked at, which he did not refer to in this article, he states that gamers are actually mad because of another reason altogether. He writes, I guess the assumption is that a professor from a degenerate college would learn there was a leggy android in a bleep bloop and realise that all their work to destroy God has been for nothing. That seems close to what people seem to believe. I'm not really sure what else could have happened, but as far as I can tell, people online aren't mad. They never were mad. I know I'm not. The only thing I'd criticise the game for is naming a robot lady Eve like it's the first draft. So basically he's either lying or lives under a rock. Either way, he shouldn't be publishing articles about stuff he knows this little about apparently. It's not professional. He's displayed no reason for us to believe that he has managed to formulate an informed opinion on this issue, as the whole piece reads like ramblings with no evidence or a solid argument. It's just a hit piece aimed at the type of gamers he doesn't like. Either that, or he does know what actually happened, but it doesn't fit the narrative he's looking for and therefore overlooks it entirely. It comes across as the sloppy work of someone who doesn't even care that his column is so easy to pick apart. There's a level of complacency to it. He's more interested in dunking on gamers and calling them names than writing something truthful and coherent. He would go on to say, it is embarrassing to get excited that a character's hot, especially when it's mostly because you think someone else will be sad that they're hot. That's also sad. You're not even happy that the character is attractive to you, you just want someone else to be bummed out. What Drucker is referring to is Schadenfreude, a completely natural feeling most people get. Schadenfreude, the pleasure derived from others' misfortune, is a complex psychological phenomenon influenced by various factors. It can stem from social comparison, where witnessing others' failures boosts one's own self-esteem, as well as from feelings of envy, resentment, or in-group versus out-group dynamics, like the left versus the right and vice versa, or pompous game journalists versus the people they refer to as weirdos, dorks, and dweebs. The belief in a just world can also contribute, as misfortune seen as deserved can evoke satisfaction. For example, people enjoyed seeing the IGN France journalist receive comeuppance because they felt their voices had been heard. Additionally, Schadenfreude may serve as a coping mechanism, offering temporary relief from one's own struggles. Personality traits such as competitiveness or low empathy may further predispose individuals to experience Schadenfreude. Overall, while it's a natural human tendency, its expression and intensity can vary widely among individuals and cultures. This is why people love reading articles about the downfall of popular celebrities or writing an article laughing at gamers being stupid. I mean, after all, Drucker appears to have self-esteem issues evident from his website called At the Mountains of Sadness. On this website, he affirms to himself, to make himself feel better about turning 40, a massive list of accolades and achievements from the last 10 years that he achieved. Later in the article, he even talks about his body image issues from his 20s and refers to himself as a pasty, blubbery mess of a man who doesn't own a house or have children and knows nothing about planning his financial future. No one is perfect, nor should they be, and Drucker, to be fair, seems acutely aware of his own perceived shortcomings. So therefore, if you strip away all of his incredible achievements in his career, he fits the narrative of the stereotypical gamer, Just to be clear, just because it's a stereotype doesn't mean it's correct, but it does raise the question, is Drucker's perceived dislike of gamer culture a form of self-loathing, considering he has self-esteem issues and classes himself as a gamer? Is he simply projecting? Moving on in his article to just direct insults at gamers, he says, "So to a lot of dweebs, a video game company drawing up a conventionally attractive woman probably feels like someone is finally in their corner, because if the people who draw disgusting normal-bodied characters are your enemy, then the people who draw sexy Jessica Rabbit-style characters are your best friends. Even though, and this is the heartbreaker, neither knows you exist, and both would be worse off for meeting you. This is just nastiness for the complete and utter sake of nastiness, calling people dweebs, dorks and internet weirdos while simultaneously deflecting away from the very issue which caused the Stellar Blade journalist backlash in the first place isn't a good look, and there is no excuse for nastiness, even if they perceive that others have been nasty first. There's never smoke without fire, and there's always room for constructive dialogue." He further says, "I can assure you that very few people are mad that there's yet another attractive cybernetic robo-frau in a game." He's correct.
Correct, at last.
But he's also missed the point. It's not the fact there's a huge amount of people who are angry about Eve's appearance in Stellar Blade, it's that there are people in very high places who are mad about the character, who are directing insults and potshots at the game's designer. That sort of conduct coming from places like IGN confirms the widespread belief that radical nutjobs do indeed hold positions of power in these organisations. It's not just a conspiracy theory anymore, it's true. It's a small fringe, but a small fringe in places of influence with massive platforms. People like me don't have that kind of reach, let alone the average gamer. Drucker has a platform that Dave from Aberystwyth doesn't. The comment section is the best Dave has. He signs off with the following: "When you get excited about the fantasy of people clutching their pearls, you just seem like a person whose opinions are only based on reacting to someone else. Dorks." Again, a ridiculous statement to make, considering he claims that this article has been made in response to his perceived reaction of gamers. It's a reaction of a reaction, just as this very video is a reaction of a reaction of reaction. Reaction inception. Beautiful. So calling people dorks just for having a natural reaction seems to me as though there's somewhat of a lack of empathy there. Going back to the title of the article, "The gaming culture war over hot characters is hilariously stupid," the article doesn't overly actually address this conversation. As you've seen, it's more of a hit piece on gamers' intelligence. So here is my take, seeing as the article didn't really attempt to give one. While on the surface the gaming culture war on hot characters can indeed appear hilariously stupid, if you apply some deeper thinking skills to this phenomenon, this actually makes a lot more sense than many would first think. Let me explain how I see it. No matter what buzzword you throw in about this so-called culture war, when it comes to this particular battle, the crux of the argument is realism versus idealism. Some gamers would like everything to be more realistic, whereas another section wants everything to be idealistic. Depending on your political views, you may see either or as the opposite of each other. Here's what I mean as a centrist looking in at the whole spectrum rather than just the perceived opposition. A lot of people who have really grounded traditional jobs, you know, butcher, baker, candlestick maker, a lot of these people are the facts over feelings sorts, who are seeking idealistic escapism in their games, what they perceive as fantasy. These are the people who work for a living rather than passion, whether they be plumbers, manual workers, bankers or anything in between. They want to escape the rut of their work and enter a world full of sexy ladies, big guns and, most importantly, fun. On the other hand, people who seem to be more drawn towards the arts, who put feelings above fact, journalists tend to prefer to see what they perceive as realism within their games. For example, more lifelike detail regarding culture and civilizations. If you work in the arts, your working life is probably more fantastical than the average salaryman who turns up to their 9-to-5 job, clock watching all day for a paycheck at the end of each month. This means that, in a way, a more grounded game is their escapism. Obviously, I realise there will be outliers and overlaps. That's the beauty of being a centrist. Neither side is right or wrong, but one thing is clear. Far more people have traditional jobs than those in the arts. This means that this is why the idealistic looking media, not just games, has always been more popular. But this doesn't stop the minority of people, the ones who work in the arts, from trying to create more realistic games reflecting on what appeals to them. And equally as important, game journalists who share their tastes. This is why we have a culture war. The people in the arts do not agree with the majority mass consumer market and in many ways look down their noses at them, as illustrated by Mike Drucker's article. If you're still here and want to treat yourself to a lovely game at a heavily discounted price, then you can get up to 90% off thousands of games using my Instant Gaming affiliate link in the pinned comment. And if you really like what I do, please consider backing me on Patreon. Thank you.